Hello. My name is Billy. The talk today is work and play. We were given explicit instructions, no shilling. So I'm talking about where I sort of see the direction of things. But since I have seen a little bit of shilling, I'm going to talk for just a second. Yeah, that's me. I'm Billy. Recently co-founded a game studio called Trifle with Everett Williams here in the audience. And we launched an on-chain game. Described earlier, it's a off-chain verifiable. It's a ZK game. You submit the proofs on-chain so you can get 25 frames per second, 20 millisecond updates. We like to think it's the first on-chain parkour game. I don't know if you guys have heard this distinction, but every game can be put into one of two categories. They're either a menu game or a parkour game. So Super Mario Brothers is actually a parkour game, but Final Fantasy is actually a menu game. You're just basically making menu selections. And all blockchain games have basically been menu games. So I like to think that we are the first parkour game that is on chain. And we're currently running a tournament. So I completely forgive you for not watching any of this talk. If you go to anybody.gg on your phone right now and play, it's mobile friendly. The tournament is like a bell curve tournament, which means that we reward the person who has the best score, the person who has the worst score, and then the person who has the most average score. So if you get a score at all, at the end of the week, if your score just so happens to be the most average out of everybody, you win a prize as large as the winner and the loser. Previously, I was at EIR at 1KX, worked in the Cosmos space, Interchain. This is all cut off, but an NFT gallery called Folia. And one of the super early on-chain games from 2017, 2018, 2019 is Clover's Network. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but that was sort of the start to the space. So the talk today, it's still early days, but autonomous worlds are super barren. I think that's been a sort of recurring theme to this talk. And most of the most interesting aspects of on-chain games only really manifest when many people are there, when you're doing interesting things. You know, it's great that your game is composable, but why would anyone want to compose with it if it's a ghost town and nothing interesting is happening there? So Minecraft is cool, but only once there's a lot of people there, right? So Minecraft has this fun first-person shooter game that sort of onboarded a bunch of people, and then once they were there, other interesting things happen. So I'm going to talk about the kind of two options I think that we have for basically doing that initial onboarding, getting that 0 to 1, and then all of the really exciting things become possible. And those two options are basically broken in between narratives and incentives. First, I'm going to talk about narratives. So the background here is, a barren wasteland. It's this red desert. And I think if you try to convince many people to move to somewhere in the middle of nowhere with absolutely no infrastructure, no natural resources, no water, nothing going on, no other people, the desert, it's going to be really hard to convince anyone to do that. However, as soon as you slightly change that request and you ask them, would you like to go to Mars? People think it's an amazing, majestic endeavor. It's this huge ordeal. It's romantic, et cetera. And all of a sudden, you have people who are willing to do the exact same thing, but the narrative is completely different. All of a sudden, there's a reason to do it. I was recently reminded of Shackleton's ad in the newspaper for convincing people to join his crew and go down to Antarctica. It's described as bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, but honor and recognition in case of success. So surely you will go and die a terrible death, but he still had thousands of people line up trying to join his crew. And it's all about the sort of narrative strength of going somewhere very barren. So despite the fact that it's barren, you can create a narrative to do so. I think the project right now that's really found the right narrative for our barren landscapes, at least to date, is probably this cursed machine. The narrative there, of course, is suffer with us. It's terrible here. Let's make a joke out of how fucking terrible it is. So the other side of this is incentives. And incentives are a great way to get people to move to barren and terrible places. For instance, during the Cold War, Berlin was this tiny island wrapped around the communist Iron Curtain. However, there was a stipend. You basically got an allowance if you were willing to risk living in Berlin during this period. And so it was a way to sort of keep the population there. You pay people to do the thing that you want. It's not hard, incentives. Similarly, the Homestead Act, pay Americans to go and steal land from the Indians, give them free land, worked really well. The problem with most incentives is that they're not usually sustainable. And so in the blockchain space, we have, of course, Axie Infinity, the sort of play to earn ideal. I think we saw a really great presentation earlier from Small Brain about sort of the collapsing shape of that incentive model. And so I think what's really important is to rethink incentives so that they're sustainable, so that you're not sort of just paying somebody over and over to do the same thing, and then it collapses once you run out of money. But the question really is, why do we have to think of it as narratives or incentives? Is there this secret, complex third thing that is some sort of a blend of the two of them? And thinking about this, you can put it kind of on a spectrum from games can either have strong narratives or they can have strong incentives, or reasons to move something or to do something is because of a strong narrative or a strong incentive. But I think that somewhere in between is an interesting space that is underexplored, especially in our space. And I'm kind of calling this maybe skin in the game. I'm not really sure. So we've got, games of skill, our narrative, and games of chance, but games of skin, maybe, I don't know. So we really want to think about what's in the middle here, because incentives that are purely incentive are sort of mindless slot machines. And when you have a fully narrative game, you sort of live only in that sphere of existence. But I think it's important to think of a couple examples of projects from the incentive side and projects from the narrative side, which get closer to the middle. The first one that comes to mind is horse racing. So I grew up in Kentucky. Horse racing's everywhere. I'm terrible at betting on horses. I never predict the right horse, but I love going to the horse track. And if you've ever watched a horse race, it's actually really boring unless you have a bet. Now, I don't go there to make money. You could also sort of split this into intrinsic value as narrative on the left and extrinsic value as incentives on the right. I don't go to the horse track for extrinsic value. I'd say very few people realistically make extrinsic value from the racetrack. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. Somebody has to make money in the middle. But there's tons of intrinsic value here. It's a really deep, rich culture. It's very exciting. But you don't care about the race unless you've sort of paid the dramatic admission fee of buying a ticket to watch those horses and to care, to have like dramatic event in the entire thing. You sort of have to participate. And that's the skin in the game. Similarly, poker. I mean, I know that there is professional poker players out there, but I think it's the vast minority of people who actually play poker are at it in order to earn a living. I play poker with some friends sometimes, and games will last 6-7 hours. And like at best, I've maybe earned like $2 an hour during those 8-hour sessions. So this is not an extrinsically motivated thing, but the game completely falls apart unless money is involved. It just doesn't work logically. So I'm there for intrinsic value, but extrinsic value is obviously a big part of it. On the other side of the spectrum, you have like, I think it's called Pagan or Pagel, one of these new games. It's a dungeon game, but it actually has pachinko built into it. So this is sort of the dramatization of the random number generator. I think it's a really beautiful gesture to take what is in almost all games as some form of a random number generator and really stretch it out and create drama around it. It's why pachinko is actually such a really fun game, because there's this tension waiting to find out how the sort of randomness resolves, and then tying that back into otherwise game of skill is a really nice step from the left to the center on that spectrum. And the other one is a reference here to Eve. So this is a headline about the most expensive battle to date. And this is really skin in the game in the world of Eve. You build up resources, but because there is some degree of a real world value translatable from those resources, you have a much stronger connection to that world. There's no easier way to make a world real than to make something in it have real value. So I think that's another example of sort of moving to the center. And I think somewhere in the middle here is probably our best bet for getting over this initial 0 to 1 moment in which we're trying to populate this sort of new category of worlds, which in many ways, again, won't be that exciting until it's populated. I think in the process, we might really just invent a new category of game. I remember a while ago talking with somebody about meme coins and realizing that much of the history of the blockchain space has been consumer investors who are very short-term aligned investing in technology, which is very long-term aligned. It's stuff that's going to take a very long time to make. So you have all of these investors who don't know what to do with themselves for the long, long time that it's going to take to build a lot of these technologies. So what do? It's why you see insanely active discords and like people just building culture around it because they're bored. They have to do something. They make up crazy narratives about what they're going to do with all of their wealth in the future. That sort of spiral down until the like purest form, which is that, we don't really even need to have a technology being built along the way. Like, let's just make a meme coin. Let's just have, a culture that we can just rally around. Like that became one of the killer products of crypto, is just sort of fanatic communities joking about like memes. And so I think that something like that could happen in our sort of autonomous world space, where we end up having to sort of focus on what is here and now, what's the kind of games that make sense for this environment, for the audience that we first have, and that we might actually create a new primitive of a game that outlives the other sort of categories. So scraps from this talk, I didn't really know how to put it in, but I guess it makes a little more sense in this version of me talking through it, is thinking about disruptive technology. I think there's like a definition of disruptive technology, that it has to be cheaper and it has to be better to really disrupt whatever came before it. And I mean, if you look at the games industry, it's doing pretty well. I know there's been some complaints that there hasn't been like a novel new breakthrough thing in the space for a while, but like in general, it's a huge industry. It's still growing massively. I don't know if we're going to be able to make something cheaper and better compared to the games that exist already. Maybe in the like fully incentive aligned zone, like maybe we can make slot machines which are cheaper and better, but I'm not sure if this is actually the tactic that we should be taking. I feel like the blue ocean strategy is maybe a bit more exciting, and it's probably what keeps me in this space. Just, red ocean, of course, is when everyone is sort of crowded in, the market is getting eaten more and more by more and more competitors. But blue ocean is where you sort of invent something completely new for a completely new category of user. And I think that we still have the possibility of doing that in the space. I think maybe we've been beating that drum for a long time, but I still think it resonates. That's my talk. I'm going to come back to the start just to remind you all of anybody.gg. Play this game, ignore any questions. How am I on time? Do I have time for questions? Any questions at all? I'm hearing, Peter, that I should keep rolling. So maybe I'll just tell you about our player chain. So in that slide earlier that David had was about, oh no, we're ready for the next? Okay, 2 minutes. Oh, you need to check? No, that's fine. That's fine. I agree with a lot of the slides and the benefits and the drawbacks of the player chain sort of matrix. Although the one I would disagree with was the infrastructure costs for creating proofs for these verifiable games. It is still possible. And I think that we're finally at the point of like good enough tech with ZK. For anybody problem, you can generate all of the proofs client side. You don't need to rely on third-party infrastructure. We do have third-party infrastructure to make it faster and smoother, but if that fails, when that fails, the browser is there to generate the proofs for you. It just takes 2 times as long, which I think is a pretty amazing trade-off when you think about the sort of trilemma in blockchains that you have to pay gas to make things verifiable. In our ZK world, you just pay in time. Has anybody opened up the browser with anybody.gg? Has anybody taken a first place, second place? Is anybody extremely mid-curve? We have one mid-curve. Watch out for AOC. He's this French teenager who's destroying everyone. Good to go?